Great to be here. My wife, Linda, and I, we've been worshiping with you a few different times, and we just are so blessed by the opportunity to gather with you. And Nate Manton, your guitarist, he's part of our church in Burlington, and it's always great to see him either here or at school. And I just appreciate the worship service and how we were brought into engagement with God. And you need to know, I just bless you as a church. I think the world of your pastor, your whole pastoral team, your leadership here. You may know this, but 75% of all churches have either plateaued or are in decline. And God's doing some really great things here at Victory Church. And I just affirm you and bless you. And the wind of God's Spirit's blowing and you have your sails up. And I just pray you continue to have a posture of submission to His purposes, and that you just cooperate with God, align your purposes with God as He continues to do the good work that is happening here. So I just bless you and affirm you. At our school, our vision tagline, if you will, is to be inspiring leaders to equip the church and engage the world. And that's why we exist as a school. We want to serve the church. And any way we as a school can serve you. And we want our students to engage the world. We want to help churches engage the world with the transformative power of the gospel. And so if any of you want to ask any questions about our school, I'd be happy to have some conversation with you. Well, there are times when we inadvertently miscommunicate. We think we're communicating something correctly and clearly, and accidentally we're inadvertently communicating something terribly incorrect, and we're way, way off the mark. And so a number of years ago when our children were younger, we have 2 adult children, but our children were younger, and sometimes I'd come home from a really full day, and I'd just, flop myself down and say, I'm just wasted. And so eventually there came a time when my kids looked at me and said, Dad, you really shouldn't say that. Oh, I shouldn't? Because it doesn't mean when you think it means. And so I took their instruction and I took that out of my vocabulary, but then I replaced it with coming home and saying, I'm just baked today. Dad, you can't say that one either, because that one doesn't mean what you think it means either. And so you can't even say whacked out, because that means something different as well. Now, you need to know something. I know that today, wasted and baked means something very different. But if you look at the etymology of these words, there was a time culturally when those words simply meant tired and exhausted. So I had to resort to something as simple as, I'm feeling diminished energy levels at this present moment. So what do you communicate? Is it always clear? Is it always true? Is it always helpful? Is it sometimes perhaps even hurtful? Listen to some of these actual quotes. Brooke Shields, during an interview to become the spokesman for federal national anti-smoking campaign, this is what she said: smoking kills, and if you're killed, you've lost a very important part of your life. Profound. Winston Bennett, University of Kentucky basketball forward, said after surgery, I've never had major surgery on any other part of my body. Major knee surgery. Marion Barry, when he was mayor of Washington, D.C., said, outside of the killings, Washington has one of the lowest crimes in the country. Does that make you want to move to Washington? Then Philadelphia Phillies manager Danny Ozark said, half this game is 90% mental. George Bush once said, it's no exaggeration to say that the undecideds could go one way or the other. And then Lee Iacocca brilliantly quipped, we've got to pause and ask ourselves, how much clean air do we really need? I like this one. This is from Joe Theismann, and he was quarterback, sports analyst, and this is what he said: the term genius is inapplicable to anyone in this game. A genius is Norman Einstein. Who is Norman Einstein? And then Miss USA contest, Miss Alabama. This is what she said when she was asked, if you could live forever, would you? And why? And this is what she said. She answered, I would not live forever because we should not live forever, because if we were supposed to live forever, then we would live forever, but we cannot live forever, which is why I would not live forever. So again, I ask, what are you communicating? Is it clear? Is it accurate? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it perhaps even hurtful somehow? Now, I mentioned our vision tagline, equipping the church, engaging the world. That's what we're about as a school. And really, as a church, you're doing the same because your leaders are committed to equipping the saints to do the work of the ministry, right? That's Ephesians 4. Equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. Why? So that we can grow ourselves into conformity to the image of Christ, but also that we can touch and transform the world with the powerful message of the gospel. And so, as I reflect upon it, as a school, it's one level of complexity to help people grapple with the concepts and principles and honing their gifts to serve the church. But when we talk about engaging our world, that is fraught with all kinds of complexity, all kinds of cultural landmines, all kinds of Scud missiles. Because, and we know this, right? The church today, and in large measure, the reputation of the message of Christianity as a whole, we have a PR problem. We have a public relations dilemma. And whereas at one point in, let's say, the history of our nation, that there was a positive perspective on the church, we then moved to a season where we were perceived more irrelevantly and more disconnected, just sort of, the church, oh yeah, well, and so it was more neutral, but we have moved from a positive perception to neutral position to now actually being perceived with very cynical, worse, hostile eyes. And we're the object of mockery and hostility, and culturally, particularly in the whole PC theme, we are on the wrong side. And so we are perceived increasingly with cynical eyes. In 2007, David Kinnaman wrote a book called Unchristian. It was based on the research results of a study done by Gabe Lyons. And his purpose was to serve young leaders with a really accurate perception as to the kind of people they're seeking to reach and how did young adults today view the church. And so a very large, extensive survey was done of particularly young adults, people outside the church, and how they viewed the church. And their response was not only perceptions, but it also grew out of their own experiences. Kinnaman digested that material, put it in book form, and these are the highlights of Kinnaman's research. He talks about how the church is viewed increasingly as being hypocritical, insincere, anti-homosexual, sheltered, boring, old-fashioned, unintelligent, too involved in politics, too judgmental. And I know this is research that's grounded in the United States, but let's be candid, with the exception of perhaps too involved in politics, we could be painted with those same brush strokes. So again, ask, what are we communicating? Is it clear? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it perhaps even sometimes hurtful? Because we think we're communicating with great clarity, but the world is sometimes hearing something so very, very different. And where we've been unclear, we need to be clear. Clear with the highest megapixel quality possible. Absolute razor-sharp quality. And where we've been misrepresented, and we've been misrepresented a lot, but where we've been misrepresented, we've got to change that reputation. And we've got to bend over backwards and overcompensate for that misrepresentation. And we've got to change that image and adorn our message with the beauty of the gospel. And where we have messed up, we've got to apologize and make right. And so this whole series, I commend you for this series, No Perfect People, because we aren't perfect. But the perception that we sometimes have communicated is that we are perfect and we've got it all together, and our message that we've communicated has sometimes been so unhelpful to the wonder of the gospel. And so there are times we've been insincere. And we've been accused of being insincere because sometimes we were insincere. And we've been accused of being harsh and judgmental because sometimes we have been harsh and insensitive. And we've been accused of being indifferent. And we've been accused of that because sometimes we have been indifferent. And we're insincere, and we're harsh and judgmental, and we're indifferent oftentimes because our heart isn't as large as it should be, and we've not loved the way we ought to have loved. So let's talk about these this morning. We've been accused of being insincere. At times we have been insincere because we have not loved the way God has asked us to love. Now, we talk like we're concerned. And we communicate verbally that we care and that we love, but sometimes we've not had attending actions to that. And we have hurt ourselves. And we've given people the wrong impression. Kinnaman quotes from a man named Sean, young man 22, and he says this: Christians are too concerned with converting people. They are insincere. All I ever hear is get saved. I tried the whole Jesus thing already. It didn't work for me before, and now I'm not interested. And while we communicate heart for people's souls, sometimes we've not communicated that we care about the whole person. Now, of course, ultimately, we want people to engage a relationship with the living God through Jesus Christ. But we need to communicate an authentic heart for the whole person. Not always done that. I'm sure you've been in situations where you've been in a room with some VIPs. Perhaps people of significant stature in business or government or some sort of role. And as you're engaging in conversation with you, you can almost feel them looking through you. Or maybe worse, they're actually looking over your shoulder to see the next person in line because they're anxious to engage that person in conversation, right? Have you ever had that? And you think this conversation is so insincere. And it just irritates us. It puts us off and puts us on defense and makes us want to back right out of any prospective relationship there. So we're in a room of 30 people, 40 people. Some of us were wired in ways that we're going to look for someone we know, and we're going to buddy up with that person we know, and we're going to spend the whole time engaging that person in conversation, right? Some of us are a little bit more sanguine or outgoing, and we're in a room of 30 people, 35 people. We're going to try to touch base with everybody we possibly can. Frankly, this is a little bit more my wiring, and if there's a room of 34, I'm going to try and engage in conversation with absolutely everybody. And some of you in this room are going to look for someone new. Maybe somebody's not talking to anybody. And you're going to move into their life, and you're going to engage them in conversation, and you're going to start talking to them. And you're going to look them in the eyes. Am I creeping you out right now? Okay. But you're going to look in their eyes, and you're going to ask about their life and their family and their background, their story, and you're going to engage them with tremendous sincerity. That's what my wife's like. And so I told this in chapel on Wednesday, and yesterday we have a function with 40 people, and guess what? I hit all 40. And my wife talked to 2 people. And she asked about their kids and their family. That's sincerity. Jesus cared for people, and he demonstrated that through sincerity, not just through the words he said, but through the actions that accompanied those words. Listen to Mark chapter 1. Jesus is in an interchange with a leper. And in Mark chapter 1, verse 40, it says this: And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean." And moved with pity. Some of your translations say compassion, but pity is the right word. He felt deeply. He felt deep pity. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, and he touched him, and he said, "I will. I want to. I will be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. Now, we know what leprosy does. It's a debilitating disease, and people were afraid of its infectious nature, and they were afraid of touching lepers, and lepers were ostracized from families. They were ostracized from the community. They were certainly ostracized from the faith community because they were perceived to have been given leprosy because it was some sort of curse in their life, so they were out of the faith community. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with lepers. And here this leper heard something about this Jesus. And he comes to Jesus pleading, it says, imploring. He says, "If you want, you could make me clean." And Jesus, I think, symbolically, with great symbolism, doesn't just say be clean, but he reaches out and touches him. Now think about this. This man probably hadn't been touched in a long time, or at least as long as he had had leprosy. Jesus touches him and makes him whole and cleanses him. See, Jesus' sincerity wasn't just measured in the actual words he said, but in the expressions and the actions that accompanied his ministry. Absolute sincerity. And Jesus communicated this with absolute clarity. feeling deeply because he loved this man. Didn't know who he was, didn't know if he was a Jew, didn't know if he was a Gentile, didn't even know if he once came from an elite home, he didn't know it, but he just reached out to this person. We can learn so much from the modeling of Jesus. Now, at times we've been harsh and judgmental. Again, because we did not care, because we did not love, at least not the way we should have loved. Here's the way our thinking goes. And I'm painting with a broad paintbrush, but I want to invite you to reflect upon this. We're concerned about truth, right? I'm concerned about truth. If you hear me saying anything other than that, anything beyond that I'm not concerned about truth, then you're not hearing me correct. In fact, I think the last time I was here, I think I spoke about truth. So I value truth deeply. I know your pastor values truth deeply. This church values the revelation of God because this is the roadmap for life. This is God's revelation of truth to us. But sometimes we're more concerned about truth than we are about love. And we think truth has got to be bigger and love has to somehow shrink. Let me remind you something really fundamental. 1 John says, God is love. God is love. And then you read John chapter 14, and Jesus says, I'm the way, I am the truth, and I'm the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And so Jesus says, I, as God, I'm the embodiment of truth. I'm the embodiment of absolute, out-of-body, objective truth. In other words, it's not anything measured in relationship by somebody else or to something else. It is fixed and objective, not compared to anything. God is absolute reality. It's absolute truth. And yet God is also love. Which is more true of God? Well, both are true, and they're inseparable from each other. And so we've got to embrace truth and love simultaneously. But sometimes we think, well, truth, for it to do its work, we've got to be harsh, and sometimes we add this acidic, caustic component to it. Because we think that's the only way truth does its work. Now look, when truth confronts us, it will do its work, and it can leave us in a pile of brokenness and regret and shame. But it's not in how it's delivered, it's in the truth itself. See, I want to invite you to look at the scriptures, look at the Gospels. Who was Jesus harshest with? Lost people? No. He was harshest with Pharisees, those who knew better. Those who have been visited by the grace of God, or at least should have been, and who knew about the heart of God, and who knew the scriptures, who knew the law. They of all people should get it right. And those people who were hypocrites, and Jesus was most frustrated, most agitated, and most irritated by hypocrites, by people who should have known better. But the broken, who know they're broken, he displayed incredible grace and love. He didn't soften truth, not one bit. He let truth confront them. But it was truth that it was wonderfully enveloped in love. So, let's talk about two particular categories of application. Let's talk about lifestyle, and let's talk about ideology or worldview. Lifestyle. Perhaps the most significant social, moral issue of our day relates to LGBTQ issues, right? Huge issue. And in large measure, painting broadly here, Christians are viewed as having contempt for gays and lesbians. That is how we are perceived. And it's in large measure because we are so concerned about truth. But somehow we fail to communicate love. Now, we do believe in truth. Absolutely. We believe in, I know as a church, we believe in the framework of marriage, of heterosexual, monogamous, permanent marriage. And we also believe in the consequences of sexual sin, whether it's extramarital or premarital, or whether it's uncontrolled lust, or whether it's sexual abuse, all kinds of negative consequences set into motion. But then there's the whole component of heart. And so people today who have same-sex attraction aren't sure what to do with that. And perhaps there are some of you here who have same-sex attraction, and you're afraid to talk about it because you know the aura and the reputation the church has for having the conversation over this. I know your pastor has a great concern for this. because they want to communicate love while communicating truth. And it's truth enveloped in love. And that's what Jesus modeled, and that's what we need to model. Now let's talk about worldview. Let's talk about ideology. A lot of conversations in recent weeks about what took place in Paris a couple of weeks ago. And we think of ISIS, or maybe we think of Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or these various terrorist kinds of organizations. Listen, these are evil ideologies that are attached to religious worldviews. They are evil. No doubt there. But every Muslim needs Christ just as you and I need Christ. And we can develop this sense of harshness and spirit of judgment and condescension, which completely removes the opportunity to show love. And so this becomes very practical, doesn't it? Because we all know what's happening. In the next few weeks, we're going to have 200 refugees come to Moose Jaw. And we want to live out Christ before them. I love what Eugene Peterson, how he translates Ephesians 4 in this. This is a well-known passage, but I want you to listen to how Eugene Peterson translates this passage as he talks about the relation between truth and love. He says in chapter 4, verse 14, "No prolonged infancies among us, please. We'll not tolerate babes in the woods, small children who are easy marks for imposters. God wants us to grow up, to know the whole truth and to tell it in love." I like that. To know the whole truth, but tell it in love. Like Christ and everything, because he modeled it so perfectly. We take our lead from Christ, who is the source of everything we do. He keeps us in step with each other. His very breath and blood flow through us, nourishing us so that we'll grow up healthy in God, robust in love. I love that imagery of robust in love. At times, we've been insincere because we just didn't love. And there are times we were harsh and judgmental because we didn't love. We cared about truth, but we didn't have it enveloped with love. There's one more area I want to talk about. At times, we've been indifferent. And we're indifferent because we did not love. And so whether it's genocide or world hunger or poverty, or whether it's sex trafficking, or whether it's some sort of crisis that's taken place in the world through a natural disaster or through war. And we keep hearing of those, and we all know the language of compassion fatigue, but at some point, we just got used to our own indifference. And we just didn't care. And we didn't care because we didn't love. Listen to this episode in Jesus' life. It's not unlike the interchange he had with a leper. But in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus is just overwhelmed with what he sees, and then it describes what he feels. And in Matthew chapter 9, verse 35, it says this, "And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction." And then it says this, "When he saw the crowds," and remember, this is Jesus, this is God. When he sees crowds, he sees individuals just all together. "And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them." And the word there speaks of really, literally in Greek, an aching in his bowels, in the core of his stomach. We would say his gut ached. We might say his heart ached, but here his gut just ached within him. Why? Because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And here again, the picture in the original language is that they were animals that had been hunted down by wolves, animals that had been hunted down by dangerous prey, by animals after them. They were the prey, and they were exhausted, they were spent, they were completely played out, and they had no leadership, no shepherd to protect them, to guide them, to lead them to safety. And Jesus looked at them, and what does it say? He saw and he felt compassion because he loved them. Let me tell you a story. We lived in Burlington for 19 years before coming here. And in our community in Burlington, we lived in a very pleasant community. And we got to know all of our neighbors and connected with our neighbors in various ways, and had some to church and had some in our homes. And they knew who we were and what we did. We had positive relations with all of our neighbors. There was one particular neighbor beside us. They moved away, and we were sad to see them leave, and new neighbors came. And so new neighbors come in. I'm over there trying to introduce myself and set a bit of a temperature for a good neighborly relationship and hopefully ultimately spiritual conversations. And into into the property beside us, new neighbors came, and I met Bob. And Bob wheeled in his Harley, and he had this big black F-150. And I know having a Ford truck here is no, but in Pleasantville, he had a bit of an aura because he was a biker. And if you're a biker, that's cool. That's cool. But this is Pleasantville, and this is my first interchange with him, okay? This is my first interchange. We're in conversation. So what do you do, Mike? I said, well, actually, I'm a pastor of a local church. Well, we're going to get along just fine as long as you don't preach at me. That's our first conversation. No exaggeration. So, I'm already walking on eggshells, but I want to be a good neighbor. And so, hi, Bob, and going back and forth from work. And one of the things we used to do with our old neighbors, or previous neighbors, is sometimes I'd cut a bit of his grass and make it easier for him. And sometimes he'd cut a bit of my grass and make it easier for me. And we just had a good neighbor relationship. Well, I cut some of his grass, and the next day he comes over and says, excuse me, Mike, I'll cut my grass, you cut your grass. Okay, Bob. On another occasion, I was watering our grass, okay, and it was a windy day, and he liked to polish his black F-150 every Saturday, and, well, I don't have to finish the story, right? Some drops got in his truck, comes over, knocks on the door. Mike, just want you to know, you water your grass, I'll water my grass. And the next day, and this is no exaggeration, my wife was here, she could tell you, he gets a black can of spray paint, and he paints the sidewalk. And he points out, he says, Mike, that's the property line. Do you remember as a kid with your sister or your brother, you'd say, this is the line in the back seat of the car, you can't cross that line. That's what I felt like. This is my neighbor. I'm trying to be a good neighbor to him. So we have a very eggshell relationship, or at least I'm on eggshells. He's secure, but I'm walking on eggshells. Well, one day he knocks on the door, and he's in tears. My biker neighbor's in tears. Wow. And he says, Mike, I got to talk to you. My wife's leaving me. Oh. And so we began having conversations about this, regular conversations about this. And after a couple of months, meeting with him and meeting with his wife, they came back together again. Now, what had happened was she had left him, and then they were forced to sell the house, and so they ended up living somewhere else in another part of town. And basically, when they reunited, I didn't see him again. Lost contact. Sometime later, I'm not sure, maybe another year later, maybe longer, knocks on the door. There's Bob in tears again. Mike, I've really messed up. I need to talk to you. Well, what's going on, Bob? He's, well, my wife's left me. She's left me again. And this time, I think it's for good because I really messed up. I didn't change. I didn't have the opportunity I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to change. See, he had been given a second chance with his wife. And you know what? I mean, I'm telling him in a humorous way, but he's a harsh man. He's unkind. And his wife didn't enjoy living with him and couldn't. And so this time it seemed the marriage was over. So we started to meet. I think likely about weekly, if not at least 3 times a month. And we started going through the Word. And we pray together, and we talk about his life. And somewhere along the line, I don't remember a particular day when I prayed with him. I prayed with him every time. But I don't particularly remember when this happened. But one day he just simply said to me, Mike, I get it. And he surrendered his life to Christ, recognized the brokenness of his sin, and received the forgiveness that Christ promises to every one of us. And he starts growing. And we keep meeting, and I start meeting with his wife. And after probably about a year and a half, they reconcile and reunite. And he continues to slowly grow. I mean, he's got a lot of challenges, a lot of complexity in his life, but he continues to grow, continues to interact with God's word, and continues to reach out to his wife. He's changing. There's so many points to that story, but here's the point for our theme this morning. The first time Bob came over to me in tears, I felt compassion. The second time he came over, in my carnality, and if I can be honest with you, I felt like, you turkey. You messed up. She gave you a second chance. We talked about the gospel. We talked about how you need to change, and you messed up. But I chose to still meet with him. And there are times compassion is felt, and there are times compassion is chosen, is decided upon. Both still require love. So where we've been insincere, we need to confess that and fan the flame of love. And where we've been harsh and judgmental, we need to confess that and fan the flame of love. And where we've been indifferent, we need to confess that and fan the flame of authentic love in our lives. So here's the application. And this is profoundly brain dead simple. We talk about having an impact in our world. We talk about engaging our world with the transforming power of the gospel. How will we build the platform of our message? How will we extend the platform of our ministry? Jesus tells us in John chapter 13 where he says this, "A new commandment I give to you." And you know what it says next? That you love one another. "Just as I've loved you, you also are to love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And if a watching world that so desperately looks at us and sees love, they're going to be far more interested in listening to what we have to say. So look around. Look at each other just for a moment. Look around the room. Love each other. Love each other. And when we can love each other and work things out and forgive each other and be patient with each other and live out all the fruit of the Spirit with each other, then when we engage a world that so desperately needs a message of hope, we'll have a platform on which to speak. Let's pray.